You've reached FIT TV. Stick around. We'll be right back. Bank bailouts, the mortgage foreclosure crisis, the national debt. Ladies and gentlemen, our politicians have placed fear into the American psyche with their reckless approach to our money. Americans have been duped. In fact, you were duped into belief systems of unworkable dimensions. Obamanomics has failed us. In a way, the 2008 election for change was canceled by the 2010 election of, whoa, not that much change, please, thank you very much. I have with me to discuss this topic two experts on this issue, Phil Curcio, a conservative and a fishing industry lobbyist, former lobbyist for the fishing industry, and Pete Nichols, co-founder of SaveHuntington.com. It seems like the money issues were so bad in that last couple of years in the Bush administration, continuing on to just the last few years with some mistakes in the Bush administration, I feel, and that the Obama administration took over and just for change. That was a vote of change, right? Vote of change. Now here we are. Okay, now suddenly that's whisked away. What do you think the reason was, first, before we get into the financial reasons? What do you think the reason for the whisking away of the Obama's change, vote for change, was?
Well, I think it was education on the part of the public. People started to realize, people were talking for years about, we're going to have a housing crisis, because property values had just been inflating over time. And what you ended up having was you had a very loose monetary policy by the Fed, which, was pushed onto the banks. And through legislations, you had all these different home ownership acts, Community Reinvestment Act. So now all of a sudden you had a lot of money chasing a lot of houses, and that just inflated the prices. And they were giving out loans to people who really couldn't afford them. There's also a segment of the population that, could afford the loan, but because of the economic downturn, lost their jobs, and now they're behind in the eight ball. The problem now is that the houses have become devalued, but you still owe money as if it was even more value, so they're considered underwater. But I think the problem started with the thinking of probably most people in Congress. And in other words, they wanted to get reelected. So what did they do? They promised everybody everything. So you promised, well, we can get you money so you can buy homes, et cetera, and then more money came in. So you had this inflationary bubble coming in where houses, say 20 years ago were worth $200,000. Now they're worth $800,000. Sooner or later, that credit bubble, that inflationary bubble is going to pop. And it happened to pop in 2008. And it took with it a lot of contractors, a lot of businesses, a lot of manufacturers. So what's happening now is you're seeing a readjustment in the economy because of what happened back in 2008. The biggest mistake that I see happening now with Obama is he's intervening again into the economy the way Bush did back in the 2000s, pumping up credit, pumping up the amount of money that's being lent out. I read in the paper the other day that American corporations are sitting on over $2 trillion that they're afraid to spend. And this is why we have this slowdown in hiring. The payroll jobs have only went up 103,000 last week.
How would you see if you were to give him advice?
Well, I would say, first of all, stop with the remedies. Stop trying to fix something, because what you have is a misallocation of resources. And when the government steps into the economy, what ends up happening is that adjustments are starting to be made. And like I said, with the housing crisis, it was a bubble that was being pumped up by the Federal Reserve and all the banks. So my advice to Obama is to stop intervening into the economy, because it's not working. You see what happened with the $800 billion stimulus. It has nothing, had no effect. We're still above 9% unemployment. So my advice then would be stop intervening, stop with the remedies, stop trying to cure things, because you're distorting the price mechanism.
So, yeah, that's what our former colleague Raf had said, that maybe we needed to come back. We needed to suffer through a period of deflation of some kind.
Well, that's fine, but it gets to a certain point where,
in order to find a base, there's no
but
base.
Politicians can't keep their hands off the economy. It's impossible. it's they're starving and you're at a buffet. You're gonna stick both hands in there and you're gonna start monkeying around and you're gonna start taking credit for what works and dodging what doesn't work. So I think it's just a matter of time before we start to see maybe some growth in the economy. But as long as the Federal Reserve keeps pumping money, you're going to see massive. Take a look at the New Deal. How many programs from 1932 until 1940 were proposed? How much money was spent? In current dollars, you're talking $1 trillion. And what effect did it have?
Right. Well, the interesting thing is that credit is given to FDR for getting us out of the Great Depression.
And he should.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
What's really interesting is that what it really was, if you look historically and take into account all the facts, it was really our involvement in World War II and the mobilization of industry in this country that really put people back to work.
They say
it wasn't the New Deal projects. It wasn't exactly right. So this whole idea of pumping more money through the Fed into the system just makes for inflation. As you've explained, it creates a really distorted economic picture and doesn't allow for the hand of the free market to really allow things to balance.
Which is what we should be all about. Let the hand of the free market
run. In my opinion,
run.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of detractors on the left who'll say, the free market is what got us into this position in the first place. You have Wall Street selling these securitized loans and derivatives, et cetera. Well, you know what? It wasn't so much that was the free market. That was sort of a collusion between a lot of Wall Street firms and legislators who allowed that type of thing to happen.
Isn't that the Security Exchange connection with Chris Cox back?
Well, again, this is where you need to define the role of government, because the Security Exchange Commission is supposed to regulate stocks and bonds. And what ended up happening is that Wall Street was allowed to come up with these crazy schemes to take a mortgage, chop it up into pieces, and sell it in different packages, in different mutual funds, if you will, something along those lines. And what ended up happening is that these houses, the prices just all of a sudden got so high that they couldn't be supported. So now all of a sudden it was almost like a margin call back in the Great Depression before, with the stock crash in '29. That all of a sudden you had too much money chasing too few goods, and it was overinflated. And it was just a matter of time before everything came crashing down.
Well, I don't think that the banks and Wall Street can really that all of the blame can properly be laid there, because their actions toward giving out riskier loans, riskier mortgages, 105% mortgages to people who really could not afford them, was really they were coerced to some degree to do that by some of the legislators. Barney Frank and Chris Dodd come to mind, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the whole idea of the Community Reinvestment Act, where they wanted all of America to be able to live the American dream. And so the banks, to some degree, because they were under pressure to give out these riskier loans, had to become more creative in order to spread their risk.
They were under pressure by the legislators? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, okay. Exactly. That they were to some degree pressured by the legislators to get more money into the hands of the American public, in many cases that really could not handle a mortgage or a larger mortgage.
Right, I agree. But where the big bang came in is that now you had Wall Street step in and took those loans and repackaged them and sold them to investors, and then you pumped more money into it. So it wasn't just you had a homeowner who had a loan and he didn't deserve to have it and they foreclosed on him, story's over. Wall Street got involved and attached to it like a magnet, and now you start pouring trillions of dollars into these mortgages and these programs.
How does that manifest itself, that the attachment?
Well, what ends up happening is that you have a mortgage on a house, let's say it's $500,000, and let's say Countrywide has that. that mortgage, that certificate, all of a sudden gets divided up because it's an actual asset. It's a value. It's a $500,000 value. It's probably inflated.
It becomes a financial instrument before it becomes
exactly
the other.
Mortgages are sold within 15 seconds after you sign the mortgage. By the time you get to your car, it's probably sold already. And by the time you get to your house, it's probably sold 2 or 3 more times to different people. That's why we had this foreclosure crisis. People were saying, well, where is my deed? Who owns my house? Nobody could find it. So I said, well, if you can't find who owns the house, who owns the deed, who owns the title to it, then you can't foreclose on me. And that's where you had this crisis where everything came to a screeching halt.
Is that still happening?
Well, and you have the robo-signers, et cetera. So you had not just the banks giving loans to people who didn't deserve them, but you also had Wall Street was allowed to go in and collateralize these loans and sell them off as investment vehicles. And then when it blows up, they took the risk, they should fail. But they weren't. They were bailed out.
Wasn't the collateralization of that paper, wasn't that also to some degree a mechanism to allow the banks to spread that risk that they were forced to take? That was also, it wasn't just a mechanism for them to make money, but it was also a mechanism for them to be able to spread the risk to some degree because they were taking on a greater degree of risk by advancing riskier mortgages and riskier paper.
Right, but the big banks, there was no risk. Everything was guaranteed by the federal government. That's why you had this.
And that's how they all wound up in Fannie and Freddie.
So everybody wanted these because now all of a sudden they were guaranteed. And who wouldn't want them? You're going to get, 7-8% return on your $1 billion guaranteed. And if the bank goes bust, the federal government will bail you out. What people need to realize is, and what's interesting is I had this conversation with somebody on a local level. And we were talking about some of the money that's being given by the states to, the local governments, the towns. And I'll give you a perfect example. Comac Road, they repaved it. They used federal stimulus money. So I had inquired why they put a sidewalk along Comac Road to the Edward Preserve Park. Nobody ever walks down that road. It's very dangerous to walk down there, but there's a sidewalk that goes for about a half a mile. So I inquired about it. I said, why did you build a sidewalk there? I can see why you paved the road. Well, it was federal money and part of the stimulus package, and we had to spend it. I said, you had to spend it? And they said, or we wouldn't get it.
So was that a sidewalk
like
to
good
nowhere?
Entitlement, it has
basically, that's what
it
it is. And the thinking is that this money comes from outer space. I'm like, well, wait a minute. That federal money is our money. Because we're all in the United States. This is our money. This is our tax dollars. This isn't money that just comes from nowhere. And you see it on a local level. And I went the other day to Elwood School District. They had a meeting because they're thinking of consolidating or combining with another school district because they don't have enough money. Because they don't want to raise property taxes 17%. So they said, well, let's combine with a bigger district. The state would give them extra money to consolidate. So they think it's free money. Hey, we get all this money for our capital projects and programs. This is great. That money comes from me. It comes from you. It comes from everybody who lives and works in New York State.
And who gets to administer that money?
The state. So now you see a consolidation of power of people in the state and the bureaucracy. And, we were talking before about, some of the things I do during the month. And one of them is I go down to the town of Huntington and I go down and I speak on various topics. But the general theme is that the money that they're spending on projects and programs, whether it be affordable housing or some type of park, I said, this is not the true role of government. This is not what you should be doing. This is great for getting votes. But what ends up happening is that this has a snowball effect on my property taxes. Now, I have less money to spend in Huntington, in the surrounding areas, because now you need it to spread it around. And this is how they get reelection. And we were talking before about term limits. I'm all in favor of term limits. I mean, look, the argument against it is, look, you have a term every 2 or 4 years. If the voters love you, they'll vote you back in again. That's not really a term limit. That's just in perpetuity. Because how can you compete against somebody,
incumbent, you mean?
an incumbent who all they have to do is show up to a donut shop or a restaurant.
And they're known.
And they get their picture in the paper.
So they're actually walking their own turf. They're actually networking while they're in office or keeping the...
Exactly. It's the Santa Claus effect. And what ends up happening is they take public money for high-profile projects, and that gets them the votes, just buying votes. It's the ancient Romans bread and circuses. And that's what we've sort of devolved into right now.
New topic on the economic issues of presidential politics is the Social Security. Shouldn't the politicians have to pay into that? They don't have a pay-in policy. I don't know if you know that.
Well, they absolutely should, and I think that they're part of the there's a new amendment that's being pushed around, and it's all over the internet, that the laws that are passed should also apply to
Right.
people in government, because
Fair is fair.
Exactly. Right. They don't have to pay for their own health insurance. They're part of a separate plan.
Right.
And
Yeah, what we do by that is we create a ruling class.
Exactly.
That really has a complete separate set of entitlements and treatments and everything else. And of course, that adds to the incentive for remaining in office, getting back to the term limits issue.
But why do we keep electing the same people?
I know that's a
sad
very
part.
far.
I mean,
you know, I had to look at New York State, and in the past election, you know, I know a lot of people that have, for the last couple of years, complained about their taxes, complained about the way government is operating and everything, and that you look after the dust settles on election night, and 99% of the same rascals are still
there,
sitting in the chairs.
Exactly.
It's really disturbing.
Let's talk about the taxation issue. Some people say that we're all living in a 50% taxation world. Not too far from reality. But the Americans become overloaded with taxation, and of course, a lot of people, they're not hearing, the politicians aren't hearing from them, I think, unless the Tea Party is part of that as well, but the changeover. But the taxation, double and triple taxation, we were overtaxed many years ago, and it didn't stop, it didn't slow down. What is it that we can do, and how do you reflect on the taxation issue in a general realm?
Well, I think, you know, I think the whole question is tied together with the deficit and with overspending, as you were just referring to. You know, people want to see their taxes go down. Then they're going to have to accept that government is going to play a lesser of a role in their lives as Santa Claus. You know,
schools are creating a bigger tax burden. I think
the schools are huge, and I think part of that problem is the public sector unions that we've allowed to just really take over. They're almost the largest voice in government at this point, are government employees. Do you see a conflict there? Because I certainly
yes,
do.
I do too. Well, what about the unions? Can we in any way impart any kind of controls on the unions, or are they? I hear that there's some reduced employment in union positions. Is that true? I mean, they're letting people go, or they're not hiring as many people?
Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think what you're going to see happen is that you're going to see states that are in deep trouble. For instance, Illinois, California, New York. Those three states are the big three right now as far as their deficits. And a large portion of their deficits are due to these public sector unions, the long-term pensions and benefits and everything else that they have to pay.
You named the three largest democratically controlled states. Any
Isn't that
connection
interesting?
with that? Yes, I'm just curious.
I'm not sure I want to conjecture on that, but I think what you're going to see happen is that when these states really get into trouble to the point where they're no longer able to pay their bills, they're going to be forced to go back and break these union contracts open and renegotiate them. I just hope that, because you know they're going to put their hand out to the federal government and ask for bailout. And I hope that common sense prevails in this matter. And I'm thankful that we have a Republican House of Representatives in right now that will very likely turn a deaf ear to those requests and force these irresponsible states to go back and rework these contracts and bring the states these union contracts and pension issues back into a realistic.
Yeah, I was going to say, weren't they unrealistic at the get-go, at the start? Some of these.
But I think it's just human nature. I think if you're on a roll and you're getting what you want, then you're going to just keep asking for more.
So you don't want to blame them.
I'm not sure I want to blame the rank and file. I would more be prone to blame the union leaders and union leadership and management.
I would blame the public for voting these people in office anyway, and allow it to happen. I mean, you're always going to have. I mean, look, if you're going to have a say in getting a bigger paycheck, you're going to vote that way.
Why wouldn't you continue to administer that education to your children to get the public job with the union attached to it?
Well, the problem is that whatever I tell my kids is going to be in the minority compared to what other people are telling their kids, and things don't change that much. You know, it's an unsustainable economic model where you have a small group of people that's getting smaller every year, paying for an even larger group of people.
Right.
It's wages are an economic good, and you cannot legislate by law an economic good and actually have it work, because these wages need to reflect the pricing mechanism. They need to go up and down depending on supply and demand. If you're going to pass a law guaranteeing a certain pension,
then you blow
you're
that.
defeating the whole purpose of
that theory up.
Exactly. So now you have government that is so heavily involved in the economy, it's creating huge malinvestments, huge distortions. And so the response from the government is, or state, local, federal level is, well, we need more programs to counteract that.
I'm seeing commercials to support union strong employment. And I remember in the past getting commercials saying, "Do you lose your police force? Do you want one less fireman in your area? Do you want them to close up this?"
Right, and that's always the first place, the first target. Yeah.
John Q. Public out there has no clue that that's not just necessarily
right
an open market.
You know, back in the late 1800s, 1870s, there was a philosopher / economist, social commentator, William Graham Sumner, who wrote an essay entitled "The Forgotten Man." In fact, it was recently a title of a book by Amity Slaves. And the forgotten man is the taxpayer who, and it's true today, who is apathetic, who doesn't know what's going on, but is forced to pay for all these schemes and scams of the politicians. And his theory is that, you know, A and B get together to make C pay for the welfare of D. And that's what always ends up happening. So now who is going to argue against, you know, either it's unemployment insurance,
A, B, or D.
Or right, exactly. Who's going to argue against welfare for a family out on the street?
And who receiving the money is
exactly.
Going to
so you're
going
to
that train.
That really can't be a campaign part of your campaign platform, because you're not going to get elected, because people's understanding of economics is very limited. It takes a very long time to understand how the pricing mechanism works. And unfortunately, you know, it's the old Shakespeare, the problem is not, you know, in the stars, it's within ourselves. And we have only ourselves to blame.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It brings to mind something that one of the framers said, Ben Franklin, said something about when people learn that they can vote themselves money from the public till, that will be the end of the republic.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we're on the verge of that.
Let's concern ourselves in the last couple of minutes with the debt and Obama's recent quote. I'll read it to you real quick. "The fact that we are here today to debate rising American debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. It is a sign that the U.S. government can't pay its own bills. It is a sign that we now depend on ongoing financial assistance from foreign countries to finance our government's reckless fiscal policies. Increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Leadership means the buck stops here. Instead, Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today on the backs of our children and grandchildren." This is a recent quote by Obama.
Well,
doesn't it sound like him?
My understanding is that was a quote from 2006 when he was a senator.
Is that right?
Yes, and that was his position when he was a senator and Bush was in charge of the White House. What I find ironic is that his position is exactly 180 degrees out of phase with that statement. And I think that shows a huge degree of hypocrisy.
I think this show is going to open that door, I hope. We'll get this out to the public, because it was unfair, a flip.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And
well, I think what's going to happen in the long term is that you're going to see people are going to hold their representatives a little more accountable for what they do. And there are very few people who actually look at the voting records in Congress. And if you look at the voting records, even, you know, Ron Paul's voting record is not true to his beliefs, because they vote for a lot of social welfare programs, the kind that they campaign against. So, you know, when you talk about Obama in 2006 being completely opposite than Obama 2010, these are the kind of people who run for office. These are the kind of who will say and do anything to get elected. If the mood of the country is cut spending and deficit reduction, that's exactly what they're going to say. If the mood is different in 2008, saying, you know, we need a new beginning and we need this program, that program, EPA, green energy, that's what they're going to do. But nobody looks at the long-term consequences of what these policies are. Until recently, actually, what I thought was amazing, in 2010, Al Gore actually admitted that the ethanol subsidies didn't work. I mean, to me, that was more shocking than getting him busted in a hotel room with a masseuse. I mean, it was, you know.
It is true. I mean, you know, I guess when you're in the learning process, you could probably still learn when you're in office, and we have to give some.
One would hope. But,
well, but I mean, what you would hope that there's going to be some clarity at some point, or moving forward and getting an education to allow your wisdom of the time in office to mature.
Until you start electing different kinds of people, we'll be having this conversation 20 years from now.
And what would be the parameter of that kind of person?
Well, as you mentioned before, you have to educate children as to, you can't spend more than you make, and that goes the same at home as it does on a federal
You got a
level.
budget at home, take your budget
Exactly.
further out.
And you look what's going on in Europe. You have countries like Greece and Portugal and Spain who are on the edge of bankruptcy, and Greece had to be bailed out because they owed so much money to their unions. They couldn't print enough money. They probably could, but it would ruin their economy. But since they're on the euro, they're not allowed to do that.
Well, I think also what we need is a trend in public servants that who want to be a public servant because they want to serve the public and not because they want to serve themselves. We've made it such a juicy apple for someone to get voted into office. We were just talking about this, the types of benefits packages they have, the completely separate health care program that Congress enjoys as opposed to the average citizen. Until we eliminate those types of incentives for getting into office, we will not get the kind of people in office that we want, that are going to be there for the purpose of serving the public because they're a statesman and a patriot rather than a self-serving person that's just looking to milk the system.
That's why I'm thinking term limits might be, it might assist the thinking of somebody getting into office.
It may be that that situations and issues have grown so large and so far beyond the grasp of the average person that to ask them to cast an educated vote might be asking too much.
Yeah, I find myself when I get to the booth occasionally not knowing who the hell these people are.
Right.
And that's not right. I mean, I spend a lot of time at this, and I try to educate myself. I get to the voting booth, and there's people I don't know.
Sure.
That means I'm shot. And if I'm doing that much work, and I consider myself to do more than most people, and I get there and I don't know something, then we really have to call upon America to educate, as you said before, Pete, because otherwise we're going to go down.
Well, either that or you're going to have to change a system to limit the damage that these people can do. I mean, you could have a complete incompetent person in office, but if he's not allowed to pull the trigger on something, that's fine. Just sit there. The less they do, less is more. The less they do, the more money we get to keep.
That's right.
And I think that people need to understand that the government can't provide anything unless it takes it away from somewhere else.
Right.
And safety, security, and some people say that the parks and the roads and other services, which I disagree, they can be privatized. Government needs to go back and sort of define exactly what it needs to do, which is safety and security.
We got only a minute left. The Americans feel disenfranchised, and I'd like to hear bullet points by each of you in about 10 to 15 seconds. What will we do? I mean, less government. What are the bullet points we can hit on so the public can get a better feel of what the right thing is to do economically?
Well, I think we need a limited government, but you need to define limited government, and the government should be limited to protecting the property rights of individuals from being seized by either criminals or people in government, which sometimes may be the same.
Anything else off the top of the head?
I would say that the general public needs to take the responsibility to learn their environment, their political environment, and to know what it is they're voting for, and to make sure that they do exercise their right to vote, because ultimately that's the only control and power that we have.
I'd like to add to that civil education. I know that's part of what you were just saying, the general public awareness, but I'd like to add civil education in a more formal, more comprehensive way at the maybe the junior high school level, somewhere in that range to work its way up, and reduce the power of the unions. I think the education system we have now is absolutely the worst possible forward-thinking.
And involvement, maybe that's a topic for another show, but certainly involvement in local school boards and deciding what the curriculum is.
And we're done with this program, and thank you very much for helping with the economic program. Phil Curcio and Pete Nichols, thank you very much. Our societal and political trends are rapidly breaking down the family and once was the cornerstone of our great American culture. FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every week. And we always invite all opposing views. My name is Chris DiMaggio. Thank you for watching FIT TV, and we'll see you again next week.